In the heart of Everbrook Valley, where rolling hills cradle a small town with a big heart, sits Grace's Sunrise Diner. To some, it's just a roadside eatery serving the best coffee and pancakes for miles. But to those who know its story, the diner is a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of quiet revolutions. At the center of it all is Autumn Grace, a single mother with Down syndrome who defied every expectation placed upon her. With steady hands and an unshakable spirit, she turned her father's dream into a thriving haven for her community. But Autumn's story is not without its battles. When a notorious biker gang arrives in Everbrook Valley, looking to exploit the diner's quiet charm, they believe they've found an easy target. What they don't realize is that Autumn's strength is forged from a legacy left by her father, Colonel Phoenix Grace, a war hero whose courage changed lives. As the gang's menace grows, secrets from the past resurface, alliances form in unexpected places, and the town must rally together to protect what matters most. What unfolds is not a story of fists or fury, but of transformation. Lives are reshaped, enemies become allies, and Autumn shows that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in how loudly you fight, but in how firmly you stand. But the challenges don't end with victory. The ripples of change spread far beyond the town's borders, and Autumn must navigate the weight of her newfound influence, the loss of a cherished mentor, and the enduring legacy of her father. What started as a fight for survival becomes a journey of self-discovery, unity, and quiet power. As the sun rises over the diner each morning, Everbrook Valley asks itself, can one woman's grace truly change the world? Pull up a chair, order a cup of coffee, and let the story unfold. You won't just witness a revolution, you'll feel it. The morning sun bathed Everbrook Valley in a warm golden glow, casting long shadows across the small town. Its rays glinted off the worn sign of Grace's Sunrise Diner, the beating heart of the sleepy community. The smell of sizzling bacon and freshly brewed coffee wafted down Main Street, inviting early risers to gather for their first meal of the day. Inside the diner, Autumn Grace, her features gentle yet focused, moved through the familiar motions of opening her establishment. Her deliberate steps and careful hands belied her condition. Autumn had Down syndrome, a fact that had been a topic of hushed conversations among townsfolk when she first took over the diner. But now, after years of proving them wrong, Grace's Sunrise Diner was a cherished sanctuary. "Morning, Autumn," said Pearl Watson, the town's self-appointed gossip, as she settled into her usual booth. Autumn responded with a kind smile, pouring coffee into Pearl's cup with practiced ease. The worn bell above the diner door jingled as River, Autumn's 12-year-old son, burst inside. His backpack jostled against his small frame as he hurried to his mother's side. "Mom, I got an A on my history test." Autumn's face lit up. "Show me, sweet boy," she said, her voice measured and warm. She carefully examined the paper he handed her, her eyes brimming with pride. "You're just like your grandpa," Pearl chimed in from her booth, her eyes twinkling. "Smart as a whip, just like Colonel Phoenix Grace." The mention of her late father caused Autumn's smile to waver, but only briefly. She gave River a quick hug before sending him off to his homework spot by the counter. In the corner booth sat Major Logan Blackwood, a retired soldier and a longtime friend of the Grace family. His silver hair gleamed under the diner lights as he nursed a steaming cup of coffee. His piercing gaze scanned the room, a habit born from years of battlefield vigilance. Logan never quite left his corner booth, both physically and mentally. "Your usual, Major?" Autumn asked as she passed by, her voice tinged with a familiarity that only years of friendship could build. "Thank you, Autumn," he replied, his voice soft but resolute. His hand hovered over his coffee cup, though he barely took a sip. Instead, his eyes flicked to the door as if anticipating something, or someone. The peaceful morning shattered as the sound of roaring motorcycles rumbled down Main Street. The clamor grew louder, closer, until a group of bikers, clad in leather and menace, pulled into view. Their bikes gleamed in the sunlight, engines growling like predators marking territory. The Shadow Riders. The group had been circling Everbrook Valley for weeks, their intimidating presence becoming a source of unease among the townsfolk. Today, they finally made their move. The leader, a towering man with a cruel smirk, killed his engine and dismounted. The patch on his leather cut read Storm, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. Flanking him were his lieutenants, Viper, whose sharp features mirrored his namesake, and Tank, a hulking figure whose silent demeanor hinted at a deeper story. Inside the diner, the lively chatter faded into a tense silence. Logan's hand gripped his coffee cup tightly, his knuckles whitening. Pearl's crossword puzzle lay forgotten on her table as her hand instinctively moved toward her phone. Autumn, unfazed by the growing shadow outside, continued her work as if nothing had changed. She set a plate of pancakes in front of a customer, then turned toward River. "Homework time," she said with steady authority, gesturing toward the counter. River hesitated, his wide eyes fixed on the bikers through the window, but he eventually obeyed, sliding into his usual spot. The bell above the door jingled again, but this time the sound carried a sense of foreboding. Storm stepped inside, filling the doorway with his presence. His boots thudded against the tile floor as he surveyed the diner. Viper followed closely behind, a smirk tugging at his lips, while Tank trailed with a stoic expression. The tension thickened as Storm's gaze settled on Autumn. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ain't this something special?" The other bikers chuckled, their laughter sharp and mocking. Logan stood from his corner booth, his movements deliberate and measured. Autumn, her chin held high, approached the group with her order pad in hand. "Welcome to Grace's. Coffee to start?" Storm's smirk widened. "Everything here special, boys?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. The laughter behind him grew louder, but Tank remained silent, his eyes flicking to Logan. Without a word, Logan set his coffee cup down with a deliberate clink, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. His voice, low and steady, carried across the diner. "That's enough." Storm turned to Logan, his amusement fading slightly. "And who are you supposed to be, old man?" "A man who doesn't take kindly to disrespect," Logan replied, his stance betraying years of military discipline. The diner held its collective breath as the two men stared each other down. Then, with a humorless chuckle, Storm backed away toward the door. "We'll be seeing you around," he said, his words more of a promise than a threat. The bikers filed out, their engines roaring to life as they tore down Main Street. Silence settled over the diner once more, but the unease lingered. Autumn quietly collected the untouched menus, her movements as deliberate as ever, though Logan noticed the slight tremor in her hands. "Mom?" River asked softly, his voice laced with worry. "It's okay, sweet boy," she said, her smile gentle but firm. "Some people just need extra time to learn kindness." Logan watched as the Shadow Riders disappeared around the corner. His jaw tightened, and his voice was almost inaudible when he finally spoke. "They'll be back." Autumn nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we'll be ready." The morning sun climbed higher over Everbrook Valley, its light glinting off the glass windows of the diner. Outside, the shadows of the past grew longer, and with them, the promise of an inevitable storm. The gentle buzz of conversation returned to Grace's Sunrise Diner, but the air remained heavy with unease. Autumn Grace continued her work as if nothing had happened, moving between tables with her usual calm. She served coffee with a smile that seemed to shield the diner from the morning's earlier tension. At the counter, River furrowed his brow as he worked through his math homework, his pencil tapping anxiously against the page. "Mom," he whispered, glancing at the window. "What if they come back?" Autumn leaned over, her warm hand resting on his shoulder. "We stick to the plan," she said softly. "We stay kind, stay strong." In the corner booth, Major Logan Blackwood watched the exchange, his sharp eyes still scanning the street through the window. The Shadow Riders were gone for now, but he knew their type. They didn't just leave, they waited, plotted, and tested boundaries. Pearl Watson, now recovered from the earlier scare, leaned toward Logan's table. "Major," she began, her voice hushed, "do you think they'll really cause trouble?" "They already are," Logan said without looking at her. "This isn't just some rowdy biker gang. They're probing, seeing how far they can push before someone pushes back." Pearl shuddered and quickly returned to her crossword puzzle, though she barely touched it. The bell above the diner door jingled, but this time, it wasn't a threat. Mayor Sterling Hayes entered, his confident gait betraying a touch of concern. "Morning, Autumn," he greeted, forcing a smile as he took a seat at the counter. "Coffee, please." Autumn poured a steaming cup and set it before him. "Morning, Mr. Mayor," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension. Hayes glanced around the diner, noting the unease on every face. "Nash stopped by earlier," he said, addressing Logan. "He mentioned the Shadow Riders. Are they going to be a problem?" "They're already a problem," Logan repeated. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They're testing this town. If no one stands up to them, they'll take what they want. Money, property, respect. It doesn't stop until someone makes it stop." Autumn paused, her hand hovering over a coffee pot. "This is my home," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They can't take that." Logan nodded approvingly. "That's the right mindset. But standing your ground means being ready for what's coming." The rumble of engines outside interrupted their conversation. Everyone in the diner froze, their eyes snapping to the window. 2 motorcycles rolled past, their riders glaring at the diner as they revved their engines loudly. River's pencil fell from his hand. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's okay, sweet boy," Autumn said, her hand steadying him. She turned to Logan. "What do we do?" Logan stood, his movements deliberate and precise. "We prepare." The lunch rush had come and gone, leaving the diner quiet. Logan and Autumn sat together at one of the booths, a map of the town spread out between them. "They'll come back," Logan said, tracing his finger along Main Street. "When they do, they'll look for weak spots, places with no defenses, no support." "They already know about the diner," Autumn replied. "It's not just my business. It's River's home. That's why we're going to make it the one place they can't touch," Logan said. His voice carried a certainty that made Autumn feel braver. "We'll need the town's support. People need to know what's at stake." The bell chimed again, and this time it was Officer Nash Walker. The off-duty officer removed his hat as he entered, his expression grim. "Logan, Autumn, mind if I sit?" "Grab a coffee," Logan said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Nash sat down, his posture tense. "Got some intel. Shadow Riders aren't just passing through. They've been recruiting from nearby towns, expanding their numbers." Logan frowned. "Any idea how many?" 20, maybe 30, Nash replied. "They're planning something big, and they're targeting you, Autumn." Autumn's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "Why me?" "They see you as a symbol," Nash explained. "Someone who doesn't back down, even when the odds are against her. People like that threaten their control." Logan's eyes narrowed. If they think they can intimidate her, they're in for a rude awakening. Autumn stood, her resolve unshaken. "What can I do to help?" "Keep doing what you're doing," Logan said. "Be visible. Be strong. But we'll also need to make sure this place is secure." Nash nodded. "I'll coordinate patrols, but the town needs to come together on this. If we show unity, they'll think twice." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the diner glowed warmly under its neon sign. Inside, Autumn wiped down the counters while River swept the floors. "Mom?" River asked hesitantly. "Yes, sweet boy," she replied, her tone gentle. "What if they hurt us?" Autumn knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "We don't let fear win. That's what your grandpa always said. Strength isn't about being the loudest or the strongest. It's about standing tall, no matter what." River nodded, trying to absorb her words. Outside, Logan stood on the sidewalk, his silhouette framed by the fading light. He watched as a lone figure approached on a motorcycle, the bike's headlight cutting through the dusk. The rider killed the engine and stepped off, his boots crunching on the gravel. It was Tank, the Shadow Rider's enforcer. Logan stepped forward, his stance neutral but firm. "What do you want?" Tank removed his helmet, his face unreadable. "Need to talk," he said gruffly. Logan didn't move. "Talk fast." Tank hesitated, then said, "Storm's planning something. Tonight." Logan's eyes narrowed. Why are you telling me this? Tank's gaze flicked toward the diner. Because my sister, she's like her. Logan followed his gaze to Autumn, who was now locking the front door. The weight of Tank's words hung in the air. I don't want to be part of this anymore, Tank admitted. But Storm doesn't let people walk away. Then it's time to make a choice, Logan said evenly. Are you with them, or are you with us? Tank didn't answer immediately, but his expression hardened with resolve. I'll be back, he said before mounting his bike and riding into the night. As Logan returned to the diner, Autumn met him at the door. What's wrong? She asked, sensing the tension. Logan looked at her, his voice steady but grave. The storm's coming sooner than we thought. The night settled over Everbrook Valley, quiet but heavy with the weight of anticipation. At Grace's Sunrise Diner, the familiar glow of neon lights stood as a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. Inside, Autumn Grace methodically locked the cash register and wiped down the counters, her movements steady despite the unease creeping into her heart. Rivers sat at the counter, his textbook open but untouched, his eyes darting nervously to the window. Logan Blackwood leaned against the wall by the door, his sharp eyes scanning the street outside. The veteran's posture was relaxed, but his hand rested close to the holster on his hip, a silent promise that he was ready for whatever might come. Tank's warning earlier in the evening replayed in his mind. If the Shadow Riders were planning something, they wouldn't wait long to make their move. You should take River upstairs, Logan said quietly to Autumn. She paused, the rag in her hand stilling on the counter. This is our home, she replied firmly. I won't hide. Logan nodded, respect glinting in his eyes. He had seen that kind of courage before, in her father, Phoenix Grace, on the battlefield. The sound came then, a low rumble in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The unmistakable growl of motorcycles echoed through the empty streets. Logan straightened, his hand tightening on the grip of his sidearm. River looked to his mother, fear etched across his young face. Mom. It's okay, sweet boy, Autumn said, her voice steady. She touched his cheek and smiled, though the edges of her composure frayed. Stay behind the counter. Do your breathing, like we practiced. The first bike came into view, its headlight piercing the darkness. More followed, one after another, until the street outside the diner was filled with the roaring engines of the Shadow Riders. Logan counted at least 20, maybe more, their leather-clad figures moving with predatory confidence. At the front, Storm dismounted, his boots crunching on the asphalt as he strode toward the diner. Behind him, Viper and a few other lieutenants followed, their faces twisted in cruel anticipation. Tank was nowhere to be seen. Storm pushed open the door, his entrance sending the bell jingling in an almost mocking tone. The other riders crowded around outside, their presence a menacing wall of intimidation. Well, well, Storm drawled, his voice carrying through the diner. Looks like the little diner's still open for business. Logan stepped forward, placing himself between Storm and Autumn. That's far enough, he said, his tone calm but commanding. Storm smirked, his eyes flicking to Logan's sidearm. You think that pea shooter's gonna scare us off, old man? No, Logan replied, his voice low, but it'll slow you down. Autumn stepped out from behind the counter, her apron still tied neatly around her waist. You're not welcome here, she said, her voice clear and steady. Storm tilted his head, feigning surprise. Is that so? You see, I was thinking this place might make a good clubhouse for my boys. You can keep working here, of course. Scrubbing floors, maybe? The bikers outside laughed, their jeers muffled by the glass. River peeked out from behind the counter, his small frame trembling with fear, but also determination. He clutched something tightly in his hands, his grandfather's folded American flag, presented at Phoenix Grace's funeral. Storm took a step closer, his sneer deepening. Or maybe we'll just burn it down. Start fresh. Logan's hand moved subtly, his posture shifting. He was ready to act, but Autumn raised a hand, stopping him. She looked Storm in the eye, her gaze unwavering. This diner isn't just a building, she said firmly. It's a place where people come together, where they find strength. You can threaten me, but you can't break what we've built here. Storm's smirk faltered for a moment, but he recovered quickly, his laughter echoing through the diner. Strength, he mocked. Lady, strength is taking what you want. And right now, I want this place. A new sound cut through the tension, the distant wail of sirens. Storm's head snapped toward the window, his smirk replaced with a scowl. Cops won't save you, he growled, stepping closer to Autumn. You think they'll always be here to protect you? The door jingled again, and Tank stepped inside. He wasn't wearing his Shadow Rider's cut. Instead, he held a rolled-up piece of paper, which he slammed onto a nearby table. Enough, he barked, his deep voice reverberating through the diner. Storm glared at him. What the hell are you doing, Tank? Ending this, Tank said. He unrolled the paper, revealing a crude map with markings and notes, plans for an all-out takeover of the town. They deserve to know what you're really up to. Viper stepped forward, his hand reaching for the knife on his belt, but Tank's glare stopped him cold. Go ahead, Tank warned. See how far that gets you. Storm's face contorted with rage. You traitor, he hissed. No, Tank shot back. I'm done being your muscle. This isn't strength. It's cowardice. Picking on a woman and her kid? That's not who I am. Logan seized the moment. It's over, Storm. Walk away while you still can. But Storm wasn't finished. He lunged toward Autumn, his hand reaching for her, but Logan moved faster. With a swift motion, he intercepted Storm, twisting his arm and pinning him against a table. Enough, Logan growled, his voice ice-cold. This ends now. The sirens grew louder, and flashing blue lights illuminated the street outside. Officers poured out of their cars, surrounding the bikers who remained outside. Storm struggled against Logan's grip, but the fight had gone out of him. This isn't over, he spat. Yes, it is, Autumn said, her voice steady. She stepped closer, her gaze piercing. You think strength is fear, but real strength is standing up to people like you. The officers moved in, handcuffing Storm and his lieutenants. The remaining bikers scattered, their engines roaring as they fled into the night. As the chaos subsided, the diner fell into an uneasy silence. Tank looked to Autumn, his expression weary but resolute. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for everything. Autumn nodded, her kind smile returning. It's never too late to choose the right thing. River emerged from behind the counter, the flag still clutched in his hands. He walked to his mother and held it up proudly. Grandpa would be proud of you, he said softly. Autumn hugged him tightly, her tears falling silently onto the flag. Logan watched the scene, his own eyes misting. Your father was right about you, Autumn, he said. You've got his strength, a different kind, but just as powerful. Outside, the town gathered, their faces a mixture of relief and awe. Grace's Sunrise Diner, once just a place for coffee and comfort, had become a symbol of resilience and unity. As the night deepened, the light from the diner shone brighter than ever, a beacon of hope in the face of darkness. The days after the Shadow Rider's downfall brought a strange stillness to Everbrook Valley, as though the town itself held its breath, unsure what came next. Grace's Sunrise Diner, once a quiet sanctuary, now stood at the center of attention. Word of Autumn Grace's defiance had spread far beyond the town limits, drawing reporters, curious strangers, and even government officials to its doors. Autumn moved through the diner with her usual grace, pouring coffee and exchanging kind smiles with regulars and newcomers alike. But behind her calm demeanor, a storm brewed in her thoughts. She felt the weight of the diner's transformation from a humble business into a symbol of resistance. Every time someone asked for her story, she felt the ghost of her father, Colonel Phoenix Grace, standing behind her, watching. She could almost hear his deep voice. Strength isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. The diner's bell jingled, breaking her thoughts. River burst in, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Mom, you won't believe this, he exclaimed, holding a folded envelope in his hands. What is it, sweet boy? Autumn asked, setting a coffee pot aside. It's from Grandpa, River said breathlessly, handing her the envelope. Autumn froze. The envelope bore the unmistakable markings of military correspondence, its edges yellowed with time. She unfolded it carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she read her father's handwriting. My dearest Autumn, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home. But I want you to know that I believed in you then, and I believe in you now. You have a strength in you that most people won't understand. They'll try to break you because of it. Don't let them. Show them that kindness is the greatest strength of all. Tears blurred her vision as she finished the letter. She held it close to her chest, feeling her father's presence as if he were standing beside her. Grandpa knew, River said softly. He knew you'd do amazing things. Autumn knelt down and hugged her son tightly. We're all stronger together, sweet boy, she whispered. That evening, as the diner closed, Autumn found Logan sitting in his usual booth, nursing a cup of coffee. His expression was distant, his silver hair catching the dim light. Thank you, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. For what? Logan asked, his voice gruff but kind. For keeping your promise to my father, Autumn replied. She placed the letter on the table between them. You've been watching over me all these years. But now I need to ask you something. Logan's gaze softened. Anything? Did he know? Autumn asked. Did my father know what would happen to him? Logan stared at the letter, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. He knew the risks, he said finally, but he also knew the reward. Saving lives, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It was worth everything to him. Autumn nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. Then I'll keep doing the same. Not just for me, but for him. The following morning, the diner buzzed with activity as volunteers from the town arrived. Tank and his sister Emma were among them, helping to reinforce the diner's windows and install a new security system. Tank approached Autumn, his towering frame almost sheepish. You shouldn't have to pay for this, he said. Autumn looked up at him, her kind smile unwavering. Family takes care of family, she replied simply. Emma, who had been arranging chairs, spoke up. You're the first person to make us feel like we belong, she said carefully, her words slow but sure. Thank you. Autumn's eyes softened. You've always belonged. Sometimes it just takes a little longer to find the right home. The diner's transformation wasn't just physical. The townsfolk who had once whispered about Autumn's abilities now rallied around her. Pearl, once the town gossip, began organizing fundraisers to support families with special needs. The mayor proposed a town-wide initiative to promote inclusivity, inspired by Autumn's quiet strength. But the changes extended beyond Everbrook Valley. News of Autumn's stand against the Shadow Riders reached other towns, inspiring similar movements. A diner owner in a neighboring city reached out, sharing how Autumn's story had given him the courage to stand up to his own struggles. Autumn remained humble through it all. It's not about me, she told a reporter one afternoon. It's about showing people that strength comes in many forms. The town's newfound unity was put to the test sooner than expected. A rumor spread that a splinter group of the Shadow Riders, those loyal to Storm, was planning retaliation. Though the town had fortified itself, fear crept back into the hearts of many. Late one night, as Autumn locked up the diner, Logan approached her. If they come back, it's not just about the diner anymore, he warned. Autumn paused, her hand resting on the doorframe. It's never just been about the diner, she replied. Logan hesitated before speaking again. If something happens to me, don't, Autumn interrupted. Nothing's going to happen to you. You've kept your promise to my father. Now it's my turn to keep it to you. The showdown came on a cold, clear night. The splinter group roared into town, but they didn't find a helpless target. Instead, they found a community standing together. Autumn stood at the diner's entrance, Logan and Tank flanking her. River held the flag from his grandfather's funeral, his small frame radiating courage. Emma and the other volunteers stood behind them, their presence a testament to the power of unity. The Shadow Riders didn't stay long. They weren't prepared for a town that wouldn't back down, for a group of people who had found strength in each other. As the last motorcycle disappeared into the night, Logan turned to Autumn. Your father would be proud, he said. Autumn nodded, her voice steady as she replied, so would you. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the diner in gold, Autumn opened its doors with her usual quiet resolve. The The sign above the door now bore new words beneath the familiar Grace's Sunrise Diner, where courage serves community. Autumn moved through the diner, serving coffee with the same steady hands that had carried her through every challenge. As she set a cup before Logan, she glanced at River, who was helping Emma clean a nearby table. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "Kindness is the greatest strength of all." And as she poured another cup of coffee, she knew the battle wasn't over. But with every act of kindness, every moment of quiet courage, she was building something unbreakable, a legacy that would outlast any storm. The cold winds of autumn swept through Everbrook Valley, but Grace's Sunrise Diner buzzed with warmth and life. The newly added slogan, "Where courage serves community," shone brightly beneath the weathered sign. Inside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon greeted both regulars and newcomers. Autumn Grace moved with quiet determination, pouring coffee and delivering plates of pancakes with her usual steady hands. She smiled at every customer, though the events of the past few weeks lingered heavily in her mind. The Shadow Rider's threat had passed, but the scars remained, on the diner, on the town, and in her heart. "Mom," River called from the counter. "Mr. Jasper's here about the windows." Autumn turned to see Jasper Stone, the town's hardware store owner, lugging a crate of supplies through the door. "Morning, Autumn," he greeted, setting the box down with a thud. "Got the reinforced glass you ordered. This stuff could stop a truck?" "Thank you, Mr. Jasper," Autumn replied, her tone warm. Jasper paused, glancing around the diner. "Place looks good," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "And stronger than ever." Autumn nodded, her smile faint but resolute. "It has to be." By midday, the diner was packed. The buzz of conversation filled the air as townsfolk mingled with visitors who had come to see the place that had become a symbol of resilience. At the counter, Major Logan Blackwood sat nursing a cup of coffee, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Despite the peace that had returned to Everbrook Valley, Logan's vigilance never waned. "You look like you're waiting for something," Pearl Watson said, sliding into the stool beside him. "Not waiting," Logan replied. "Watching. Always watching." Pearl chuckled nervously but didn't press further. She glanced at the door as it jingled, and her expression softened. Tank and his sister Emma walked in, their presence now a regular part of the diner's rhythm. Tank carried a stack of papers under his arm, and Emma clutched a clipboard with a nervous but determined expression. "Autumn," Tank said, approaching the counter. "We've got the plans for the community center expansion. Thought you'd want to see them first." Autumn wiped her hands on her apron and took the papers. Her eyes scanned the blueprints, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "This is amazing," she said, looking up at them. "Couldn't have done it without you," Tank replied. "You gave us the idea, and you showed us what real strength looks like." Emma stepped forward, her voice careful but clear. "It's not just a center. It's a place for people to belong." Autumn nodded, her smile growing. "That's all anyone needs, a place to feel safe, to feel seen." The afternoon brought a surprise visitor. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside, and a woman in a tailored suit stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement as she approached the diner. She carried a folder under her arm and wore a confident smile that made Logan sit up straighter. "Miss Grace?" the woman asked as she entered. Autumn approached, her posture calm but curious. "Yes?" The woman extended a hand. "Sarah Chun, producer for Horizon Films. I'm working on a documentary about communities overcoming adversity, and I'd like to feature you and your diner." The room fell silent as the townsfolk listened in. Logan narrowed his eyes, his protective instincts kicking in. "I'm not sure about that," Autumn replied cautiously. "This place isn't about me." "That's exactly why your story matters," Sarah insisted. "It's not just about you. It's about how you brought this town together. People need to hear it." Before Autumn could respond, River appeared at her side, his young voice filled with excitement. "Mom, you should do it. Grandpa's story deserves to be told too." Autumn hesitated, her hand brushing against the letter she kept in her apron pocket. She thought of her father's words, "Show them that kindness is the greatest strength of all." Finally, she nodded. If it helps others find their strength, then yes. As the evening approached, the diner emptied out, leaving Autumn, Logan, River, and a few close friends to close up. Tank and Emma stayed behind, helping clean tables and sort supplies. Storm's crew hasn't been back, Logan said, leaning against the counter. But I've seen some of their old recruits lurking around. You should be ready. Autumn looked up from wiping a table. Ready for what? Logan's eyes softened. For the fact that not all battles end with one victory. Some take time. But you've already shown them that this town won't back down. River chimed in from the counter. We're not scared, Grandpa Logan. Not as long as we stick together. Logan smiled faintly. That's the spirit, kid. Late that night, after everyone had gone, Autumn sat alone at one of the booths, a cup of tea in her hands. The diner was quiet now, but her mind was loud with thoughts of the past and worries about the future. River appeared, carrying a box he had found in the storage room. Mom, look at this, he said, setting it on the table. Inside were more of Phoenix's belongings. Old photographs, medals, and a journal with the name Colonel Phoenix Grace embossed on the cover. Autumn opened the journal carefully, her breath catching as she read the first entry. Her father's bold handwriting filled the page. To my dearest Autumn, if you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. But I want you to know that you are my greatest legacy. Not the medals, not the missions, just you. You have a strength in you that the world won't always understand, but it's the kind of strength that changes lives. Never doubt that. Tears slipped down Autumn's cheeks as she closed the journal and held it close. River hugged her tightly, his small arms offering a comfort far greater than his size. Grandpa was right, River said softly. You're the strongest person I know. Autumn kissed the top of his head and whispered, and you're my reason to keep going, sweet boy. The next morning, the diner opened as usual, its doors welcoming the first rays of sunlight and the familiar faces of its patrons. But something was different. The world outside was changing, inspired by the quiet revolution that had begun in Everbrook Valley. As Autumn poured coffee, Emma greeted a customer with newfound confidence, and Tank discussed plans for the community center with Logan. River, now more mature than ever, helped serve tables, his grandfather's Medal of Honor pinned proudly to his shirt. And at the heart of it all, Autumn Grace stood steady, her father's words echoing in her mind. Strength isn't in proving others wrong. It's in proving yourself right. One act of kindness at a time. As the morning sun bathed the diner in golden light, Grace's Sunrise Diner remained what it had always been. A place where courage served community and strength was measured not in force, but in the quiet power of grace. Autumn Grace woke before dawn, the cold morning air biting at her skin as she wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped outside. The streets of Everbrook Valley were quiet, bathed in the faint glow of streetlights. From the diner's porch, she watched the horizon, where the first hints of sunlight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. The day ahead was important. Sarah Chin's documentary crew was arriving for the first round of interviews, and the community center, led by Tank and Emma, was hosting its opening ceremony. Autumn felt the weight of both events pressing on her, but as she stood there, clutching the journal she'd found among her father's belongings, she found her resolve. One act of kindness at a time, she whispered to herself, repeating her father's words like a mantra. Inside the diner, River bustled around, setting up tables and double-checking the breakfast specials board. The young boy had grown more confident in recent weeks, taking on small responsibilities with the quiet determination of someone who understood the stakes. "Mom," he called, holding up an old photo of Phoenix Grace in uniform. "Should we hang this by the counter?" Autumn smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Yes, sweet boy. Right where everyone can see it." The bell above the door jingled, and Logan Blackwood stepped in, his sharp eyes scanning the room before softening as they landed on Autumn. "Morning," he greeted, his voice rough but kind. "Morning, Logan," she replied, setting a fresh cup of coffee on the counter. He sat down heavily, a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. "Big day today," he said, eyeing her carefully. Autumn nodded, her hands steady as she wiped down the counter. "It's not about me, though," she said. "It's about the town. About everyone who stood together." Logan smiled faintly, his weathered face betraying just a hint of pride. "You're too humble for your own good, Grace. None of this would have happened without you. By mid-morning, the diner was alive with activity. The documentary crew had arrived, their equipment spreading across the floor like a spider web of cables and cameras. Sarah Chun, dressed in a crisp blazer, moved with purpose, orchestrating every detail of the production. "This is perfect," Sarah said, gesturing to the framed photo of Phoenix that River had hung behind the counter. "It sets the tone. His legacy flows through everything here." Autumn nodded but kept her focus on the coffee pot, pouring a fresh round of cups for the crew. "His legacy isn't just mine to carry," she said. "It belongs to all of us now." Sarah paused, her expression softening. "That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about the fight against the Shadow Riders. It's about what came after. The way this town rebuilt itself. The way you rebuilt yourself." Autumn glanced at Logan, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, she agreed to sit for her first interview. The community center's grand opening drew a crowd larger than anyone had expected. Cars lined the streets for blocks, and the space buzzed with excitement as people from all over the county arrived to see what had been built. Tank stood at the entrance, his massive frame imposing but welcoming as he greeted attendees. Emma moved among the crowd with quiet confidence, guiding visitors through the facility's new classrooms, therapy rooms, and recreational spaces. "Not bad for a biker, huh?" Tank said to Logan, who stood nearby. Logan chuckled. "Not bad at all." The ribbon-cutting ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Mayor Hayes delivered a brief speech, followed by Emma, who carefully articulated her gratitude to the community that had supported her. Finally, Tank took the stage, his voice steady but emotional. "This place isn't just about programs or services," he said. "It's about second chances. About finding strength in places we never thought to look. I found mine here." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers carrying through the crisp autumn air. Back at the diner, Sarah's crew had just finished filming Autumn's interview when the door opened, and a familiar figure stepped inside. Storm. The room went silent as the former leader of the Shadow Riders approached the counter. His leather cut was gone, replaced by a simple jacket. His once arrogant swagger was replaced with an air of humility. Autumn set down her coffee pot, her movements slow and deliberate. "What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," Storm said, his voice low. He glanced around at the diners, his eyes landing on River. "And to thank you." "For what?" Autumn asked, her voice steady. "For showing me what strength really looks like," Storm replied. "In prison, I had time to think. About what I did, about what I became, and about what I could have been if I'd had someone like you in my corner." River stepped closer, his young voice breaking the tension. "It's not too late," he said simply. Storm blinked, his tough exterior cracking. "Maybe not," he said. "I'd like to help, if you'll let me. At the community center. I owe this town more than I can ever repay." Autumn studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Everyone deserves a chance to choose the right path," she said. That evening, as the diner closed, the crew packed up their equipment and the last customers drifted out into the night. Autumn stood at the counter, watching the quiet street outside. Logan approached her, his gait slow but steady. "You handled that well," he said. "Handled what?" she asked. "Storm," Logan replied, giving him a chance. Autumn smiled faintly. "If my father taught me anything, it's that people can surprise you, even the ones you least expect." Logan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Phoenix would be proud of you," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you." As the two stood in companionable silence, River emerged from the back room, holding Phoenix's journal. "Mom, can we read another entry tonight?" Autumn wrapped an arm around her son and nodded. "Of course, sweet boy." The next morning, as the sun rose over Everbrook Valley, Grace's Sunrise Diner opened its doors once again. The new slogan beneath the sign gleamed in the morning light, a promise to all who entered, "Where courage serves community." Autumn moved through the diner, her steps light but purposeful. She poured coffee, greeted customers, and shared quiet smiles with the people who had become her family. The quiet revolution she had started continued, spreading beyond the town's borders. And though the battles weren't over, Autumn knew she wasn't fighting alone. Because here, in this small diner, strength wasn't loud or brash. It wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about proving herself right, one act of kindness at a time. Weeks had passed since the grand opening of the community center, and Everbrook Valley had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Yet, under the surface, change rippled through the town, like quiet waves shaping the shore. At the heart of it all, Grace's Sunrise Diner remained a symbol of resilience. Its doors open to anyone seeking warmth, comfort, or simply a cup of coffee served with care. Autumn Grace stood behind the counter, her movements precise as she brewed a fresh pot. The photo of her father, Colonel Phoenix Grace, hung proudly on the wall, surrounded by new additions. A framed blueprint of the community center, a photo from the ribbon-cutting ceremony, and a patch from the Shadow Riders, left anonymously, a silent acknowledgement of the diner's impact. River rushed in from the back, his face lit with excitement. "Mom, the mayor's here. He wants to talk to you." Before Autumn could respond, Mayor Sterling Hayes stepped inside, his usual calm demeanor tinged with urgency. "Morning, Autumn," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Good morning, Mayor Hayes," she replied, setting down her coffee pot. "What brings you in so early?" He cleared his throat, glancing around the diner. "I wanted to speak with you before the town meeting tonight. We're proposing a new initiative, an annual event to honor the people who've made Everbrook Valley what it is today. And we'd like to name it after your father." Autumn froze, her breath catching. "You mean a memorial for Phoenix?" "Not just a memorial," the mayor clarified. "A celebration of courage and community. Your father's legacy started it, but you've carried it forward. We want this event to inspire others to do the same." Autumn blinked back tears, her hand brushing against the letter she kept in her apron pocket. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," River chimed in, grinning. "Grandpa would love it." Mayor Hayes smiled warmly. "You've done so much for this town, Autumn. Let us do this for you, and for Phoenix." After a long pause, Autumn nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. That evening, the town hall was packed. Townsfolk filled the pew-like benches, their faces glowing with excitement and anticipation. Logan Blackwood sat in the front row, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Tank and Emma stood at the back, leaning against the wall, their presence as steadying as ever. When the mayor announced the Phoenix Grace Community Day, the room erupted in applause. As Autumn stepped up to the podium, the noise quieted, replaced by an expectant hush. She held the microphone tightly, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "This means more to me than I can say. But I want to be clear, this isn't just about my father. It's about all of you. About how we came together, stood together, and proved that strength comes in many forms." Her words were met with another round of applause, the crowd rising to their feet. The weeks leading up to the inaugural event were a whirlwind of activity. Volunteers from all over town pitched in, organizing activities, setting up booths, and designing banners. The community center became a hub of energy, with Emma coordinating logistics and Tank managing security. On the morning of Phoenix Grace Community Day, the diner opened early to welcome visitors. Tourists, journalists, and old friends filled the booths, eager to experience the place they'd heard so much about. Autumn moved through the crowd with her usual calm efficiency, pouring coffee and greeting guests. River manned the register, his young face beaming with pride. As the clock struck noon, the event began with a parade down Main Street. Logan led the procession, carrying the American flag, followed by veterans, community leaders, and members of the newly transformed Shadow Riders. At the center of it all was Autumn, riding in an open-top car alongside River. She held the folded flag from her father's funeral in her lap, her fingers brushing the fabric as if drawing strength from it. The celebration culminated in the town square, where a stage had been set up for speeches and performances. Mayor Hayes spoke first, followed by Logan, whose words carried the weight of experience and sacrifice. Finally, it was Autumn's turn. She stepped to the microphone, her father's journal in her hands. Taking a deep breath, she opened it to the first page and began to read aloud. "To my dearest Autumn," she began, her voice clear and steady. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. But I want you to know that you have a strength in you that most people won't understand. Don't let them take that away from you. Show them that kindness is the greatest strength of all." Her voice faltered slightly as she continued, but the crowd hung on her every word. By the time she closed the journal, tears shimmered in many eyes. "I've spent my life trying to live up to those words," she said. "And what I've learned is that strength isn't about standing alone. It's about standing together. My father believed that, and now, so do I." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the valley. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the festival wound down, and the town square transformed into a makeshift dance floor. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a warm glow over the crowd. Tank danced awkwardly with Emma, who giggled at his stiff movements. Logan leaned against a railing, watching the festivities with a contented smile. Autumn sat at a table near the stage, surrounded by River, Tank, Emma, and other close friends. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax, soaking in the joy and unity that filled the air. "Mom," River said suddenly, holding up his phone. "Look at this." He showed her a news article about the event, accompanied by a photo of her speaking on stage. The headline read, "The Quiet Revolution: How One Woman's Grace Transformed a Town." Autumn laughed softly, shaking her head. "I don't know about all that," she said. Logan leaned over, his voice low but firm. "Believe it. You've done more than you realize." As the festival came to an end, Autumn stood on the diner's porch, watching the last of the crowd disperse. The air was quiet now, the stars shining brightly above. River joined her, holding the flag once more. "We did it, Mom," he said. She smiled, wrapping an arm around him. "We did it together, sweet boy." From somewhere deep inside, she felt the presence of her father, as though he were standing beside her, his voice a gentle whisper in the breeze. "I told you you'd show them." Autumn gazed out at the town she loved, her heart full of gratitude and hope. The battles weren't over, but she knew they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next, one act of kindness at a time. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Grace's Sunrise Diner stood tall, its doors open to a new day and a brighter future. Autumn Grace woke early, as she always did, to the sound of the diner's wind chime swaying gently in the crisp morning breeze. This morning, though, carried an air of change. The inaugural Phoenix Grace Community Day had been a resounding success, and the town buzzed with newfound energy. Yet, Autumn's heart was heavy as she looked over the letter clutched in her hands, the last words her father, Colonel Phoenix Grace, had written to her. She placed the letter carefully into her apron pocket and turned toward the kitchen. The smell of coffee brewing filled the air as River darted into the diner, a backpack slung over his shoulder. "Morning, Mom," he greeted cheerfully. "Morning, sweet boy," she replied, brushing a hand over his hair. River pulled a folded piece of paper from his bag. "I've been working on something. Can I show you later?" "Of course," Autumn said with a smile. The bell over the door jingled, and Logan Blackwood entered, his sharp eyes scanning the room as always. His gait was slower than usual, his silver hair catching the early light. "You're here earlier than normal," Autumn remarked, setting a fresh cup of coffee on the counter. Logan sat heavily on his usual stool. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, his voice quiet. Before Logan could continue, the door opened again, and in walked Sarah Chun, the filmmaker whose documentary had turned the world's eyes toward Everbrook Valley. She carried a tablet under her arm and a look of excitement on her face. "Autumn," Sarah began, setting the tablet on the counter. "I just got word. Your story has gone viral. The documentary has reached millions of viewers, and I've been approached by a national network. They want to feature you in a live broadcast." Autumn froze, her hands tightening around the coffee pot. "Live?" Sarah nodded. "It's a chance to inspire even more people. They want you to talk about the diner, the community, and your father's legacy." River beamed. "Mom, that's amazing. Grandpa would be so proud." Autumn hesitated. She glanced at Logan, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. "You've been preparing for this your whole life, Grace," he said softly. "You just didn't know it." The day of the broadcast arrived quickly. The diner had been transformed into a makeshift studio, with cameras and lights set up in every corner. Reporters and crew members buzzed around, preparing for the live segment. Autumn stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her apron. River appeared beside her, holding a piece of paper. "I finished what I was working on," he said, handing it to her. Autumn unfolded the paper to find a speech, written in her son's careful handwriting. "It's for you, Mom," he said, "in case you need help finding the right words." Tears filled Autumn's eyes as she hugged him tightly. "Thank you, sweet boy," she whispered. When the broadcast began, the diner was packed with townsfolk and visitors who had come to support Autumn. Sarah Chun introduced the segment, her voice carrying the weight of the story they were about to tell. "And now," Sarah said, turning to Autumn, "we're here with the woman at the heart of it all, Autumn Grace." The cameras turned to Autumn, who stood behind the counter with her hands clasped. She took a deep breath, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Kindness is the greatest strength of all." "Thank you for having me," Autumn began, her voice steady. "But this story isn't about me. It's about all of us, about how a town came together to face something bigger than any one person." As she spoke, the audience fell silent, captivated by her quiet strength. She told them about her father's sacrifice, the battle against the Shadow Riders, and the resilience of Everbrook Valley. "Strength isn't about being the loudest or the toughest," she said. "It's about showing up every day, no matter how hard it gets. It's about lifting others up, even when the world tries to bring you down." When she finished, the room erupted into applause, and the cameras panned across the crowd, capturing the emotion on every face. As the crew packed up their equipment, Autumn found Logan sitting quietly in his usual booth. She slid into the seat across from him, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. "You were right," she said softly. "I was ready for this." Logan gave her a small smile. "You've always been ready, Grace. You just needed to see it for yourself." His words carried a weight that made Autumn pause. "Is everything all right, Logan?" she asked. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. "It's time for me to step back," he said finally. Autumn's heart sank. "Why?" Logan looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Because you don't need me anymore. This town doesn't need me. You've built something strong enough to stand on its own." Tears welled in Autumn's eyes as she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You'll always be family, Logan. Always." That evening, as the diner closed, Autumn and River sat at a booth, reading through the letters and journals left behind by Phoenix. "Grandpa wrote so many things about you," River said, flipping through the pages. "He knew you'd change lives, Mom." Autumn smiled, her heart full of gratitude and pride. "I just hope I've made him proud." River looked up at her, his expression serious. "You have. We all have." The next morning, as the sun rose over Everbrook Valley, Grace's Sunrise Diner opened its doors once again. The familiar scent of coffee and pancakes filled the air as customers trickled in, their voices blending into a comforting hum. Autumn moved through the diner with her usual grace, pouring coffee and sharing quiet smiles with her patrons. Above the counter, the photo of Phoenix Grace shone in the morning light, a constant reminder of the legacy she carried. And as the bell over the door jingled, welcoming the first customer of the day, Autumn knew this was only the beginning. Because in this small diner, strength wasn't measured by battles won or lost. It was measured by the quiet revolution that grew with every act of kindness, every cup of coffee, and every life changed. And with each sunrise, Grace's legacy lived on. Autumn Grace stood in the quiet diner, her hands resting on the counter as she gazed out the window. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass, casting golden light on the bustling street outside. Everbrook Valley had changed so much in the past year. No longer a sleepy town, it had become a beacon of hope, drawing visitors, journalists, and community leaders from across the country. The door jingled, and River dashed in, his energy contagious. "Mom, I just got a letter." He waved the envelope excitedly. Autumn set aside her coffee pot and took the letter from him. The return address caught her eye, Hope Foundation for Change. "It's about your program?" she asked, unfolding the letter. River nodded, barely able to contain himself. "They want to expand it." They're offering grants to bring it to other towns. Autumn read the letter carefully, pride swelling in her chest. The program River had created, connecting children of veterans with special needs families, had started as a small initiative. Now, it was poised to grow far beyond Everbrook Valley. "You're doing incredible work, sweet boy," she said, pulling him into a hug. "I learned from the best," River replied with a grin. By mid-morning, the diner was alive with activity. Regulars mingled with newcomers, and a steady hum of conversation filled the air. At one of the corner tables, Tank and Emma sat with a group of teenagers who had recently joined the community center's mentorship program. "You've got to believe in yourself," Tank told one of the boys, a shy teen who barely looked up from his plate. "I used to think I wasn't good for anything but breaking things. But people like Autumn and my sister showed me there's another way." Emma added, her voice careful but encouraging, "Strength isn't always loud. It's showing up, even when it's hard." The boy looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. He nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his face. Meanwhile, Logan Blackwood sat in his usual booth, observing the scene with a sense of quiet pride. Though his health had continued to decline, he still made it a point to visit the diner every morning. Dr. Sage entered, carrying her medical bag. She spotted Logan and made her way to his table. "You should be resting," she said, though her tone was more affectionate than scolding. Logan smirked. "And miss this? No chance." Sage shook her head but slid into the seat across from him. "How are you feeling today?" "Alive," Logan replied simply. His gaze shifted to Autumn, who was refilling a customer's coffee. "Watching her is better medicine than anything you've got in that bag." As the lunch rush settled, Sarah Chin arrived with her documentary crew. She carried a folder of proposals, her face glowing with excitement. "Autumn, you're not going to believe this," Sarah said, setting the folder on the counter. "Networks are asking for a follow-up series. They want to show how the ripple effect of your story is spreading to other communities." Autumn looked skeptical. "I'm not sure about more cameras." Sarah leaned closer, her voice earnest. "This isn't just about you. It's about the lives you've changed, the way people are taking what you've built here and applying it to their own towns." Before Autumn could respond, the door jingled again, and a group of visitors entered. Among them was a woman in her 30s, her young daughter clutching her hand. The woman hesitated before approaching the counter. "Miss Grace?" she asked nervously. "Yes," Autumn replied with a warm smile. "My name is Andrea," the woman said. "I've heard so much about you. My daughter, Lily, has Down syndrome. When I read about your story, it gave me hope. I just wanted to say thank you." Autumn's heart swelled as she knelt to meet Lily's gaze. "Hi, Lily. It's so nice to meet you." Lily smiled shyly and handed Autumn a small drawing. It was a picture of the diner, with the words, "Thank you for being strong," scrawled at the top. Autumn's voice caught as she said, "This is beautiful. Thank you, Lily." That evening, after the diner had closed, Autumn, River, Logan, and their closest friends gathered for a quiet dinner in the back room. Tank and Emma joined them, along with Dr. Sage and Sarah Chun. As they ate, River stood up, holding a piece of paper. "I wrote something," he said. "I want to read it to everyone." The room grew silent as River began. "Strength isn't just in muscles or loud voices. It's in quiet acts of kindness. It's in showing up when it's hard. My mom taught me that, and my grandpa showed me what it looks like. Now, it's my turn to pass it on. I want to keep helping people see their own strength, just like this town helped me see mine." Tears filled Autumn's eyes as River finished. She reached out and squeezed his hand. "You're already doing it, sweet boy." Late that night, Autumn stood on the diner's porch, gazing at the stars. Logan joined her, leaning heavily on his cane. "You're building something lasting here," Logan said, his voice low. Autumn nodded. "Because of the people who believed in me. Because of you." Logan smiled faintly. "It's not just me. It's everyone who walked through those doors and found something they didn't know they needed." They stood in companionable silence, the cool night air wrapping around them. "Logan," Autumn said softly, "what do you think my father would say if he saw all this?" Logan looked at her, his expression full of warmth. "He'd say, 'I told you so.'" The next morning, Grace's Sunrise Diner opened its doors once again. Autumn moved through the space with her usual grace, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The diner wasn't just a place for coffee and pancakes anymore. It was a place where people found their strength, their purpose, and their community. And as the first rays of sunlight bathed the diner in golden light, Autumn knew one thing for certain. The quiet revolution they had started in Everbrook Valley was only the beginning. It would spread far and wide, carried by the ripple effect of kindness, courage, and the unshakable power of grace. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting Grace's Sunrise Diner in a warm, golden light. Inside, Autumn Grace moved with her familiar rhythm, her steps measured and sure as she brewed coffee and arranged plates of pancakes and eggs. The diner was calm, its early morning hum filled with the soft clinks of silverware and the low murmur of conversation. But today was different. The diner was more than full. It was alive with purpose. Veterans in crisp uniforms sat alongside reformed shadow riders, their leather cuts replaced with patches that read, "Strength through service." Young families mingled with reporters, and community leaders from neighboring towns filled the remaining booths. All had come to witness the next chapter in Everbrook Valley's transformation, sparked by the revolution that had started here. Autumn glanced at the framed photo of her father, Colonel Phoenix Grace, that hung prominently on the wall. Beneath it, a new plaque had been added, "Where Courage Serves Community." She smiled softly, her father's words echoing in her heart. Strength isn't about force. It's about showing up, every day, even when it's hard. The day's events began with the dedication of the new Logan Blackwood Center for Community Care, named in honor of the man who had quietly guided Autumn and Everbrook Valley through its darkest days. The community center, which now stood as a beacon of hope, had expanded its reach with programs for at-risk youth, job training, and special needs support. The dedication ceremony drew a crowd so large that it spilled into the streets. Tank stood at the podium, his massive frame a symbol of strength, but his voice was steady and humble as he spoke. "I used to think strength was about fear," he said, addressing the crowd. "Now I know it's about building, not breaking. Logan taught me that. Autumn taught me that. And this town gave me the chance to live it." Emma joined him, her confidence shining as she added, "This center is proof that everyone has value. It's a place where people find their voice, their purpose, and their family." The crowd erupted in applause, but it was the sight of Logan himself, seated near the front, that brought tears to many eyes. Though frail, he raised a hand in acknowledgement, his face etched with pride. As the sun climbed higher, the focus shifted back to the diner, where Sarah Chin's documentary crew prepared for a final interview with Autumn. Cameras and microphones were set up around her usual spot behind the counter, where she had stood countless times, pouring coffee and offering quiet words of encouragement. When the cameras rolled, Sarah's voice was soft but clear. "Autumn, when you look at everything that's happened here, the changes, the lives touched, how do you feel?" Autumn paused, her hands resting lightly on the counter. "Grateful," she said finally, "not just for what's been built, but for the people who built it with me. My father always said that courage isn't in what you fight against. It's in what you stand for. And here, we stand for each other." As the interview continued, people quietly gathered in the background. River, Tank, Emma, Dr. Sage, Logan, and countless others whose lives had been touched by the diner. By evening, the town square was alive with celebration. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a soft glow over the streets. A stage had been set up for speeches and performances, and music filled the air. Autumn took the stage to address the crowd, her father's journal tucked in her pocket. She stood tall, her voice carrying over the gathered townsfolk and visitors alike. "This isn't just about one diner or one town," she began. "It's about the ripple effect of kindness. What we do here, how we treat each other, echoes far beyond Everbrook Valley." She gestured toward the crowd, her voice growing stronger. "Each of you is part of this story. Each of you has the power to change someone's life just by showing up, by choosing to believe in them, and by refusing to give up." The applause was thunderous, but Autumn's eyes found River, who stood near the front of the stage, holding something in his hands. As the celebration reached its peak, River stepped forward, presenting Autumn with a framed document. "Mom," he said, his voice steady despite his emotions, "this was Grandpa's wish." Autumn took the frame, her breath catching as she read the words, "Phoenix Grace Memorial Fund, in honor of strength through kindness." Dr. Sage explained, her voice breaking slightly, "It's a scholarship program for students with disabilities, for veterans, for anyone who needs a chance. Funded by donations from across the country." Autumn looked out at the crowd, her heart full. "Thank you," she said simply. As the evening wound down, Autumn found herself standing outside the diner, the warm glow of its lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Logan joined her, leaning heavily on his cane. "You did it, Grace," he said quietly. "We did it," Autumn replied. Logan smiled faintly, his gaze distant. "Phoenix would be proud, not just of what you've built, but of who you are." Autumn touched the letter in her pocket, her father's final words forever etched in her mind. "He always believed in me," she said, "even when I didn't believe in myself." The next morning, the diner opened as it always did, the smell of fresh coffee and pancakes filling the air. Regular customers filled the booths, mingling with newcomers drawn by the town's growing reputation. Autumn moved through the space with her quiet grace, serving coffee and offering smiles. River worked alongside her, his own confidence shining as he greeted guests and took orders. Above the counter, the photo of Phoenix Grace caught the morning light, a constant reminder of the legacy they carried forward. As the day unfolded, Autumn knew one thing for certain. The quiet revolution they had started in Everbrook Valley would continue, spreading far beyond its borders. It would ripple outward, touching lives in ways they could never have imagined. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Real strength wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't demand attention or seek recognition. Real strength was quiet. It was in every cup of coffee, every act of kindness, every person who chose to believe in themselves and others. And as long as Grace's Sunrise Diner stood, that strength would endure, one quiet revolution at a time.